Hello, welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Matthew Lucas.
And I'm Stephen Ryan.
And we post every week, so do hit subscribe if you want to hear our continuing journeys of rare plants and unusual gardening. But Mr. Ryan, we're beneath your arbour, we're in your garden, and I can hear the subtle tinkling of water.
Yes,
what's going on?
Well, we've had a few inquiries about using water in the garden.
Yes.
And we thought...
Not for watering purposes.
Yes, right.
Decorative purposes.
Decorative purposes. So we thought we might start with one of my smaller bodies of water, but just to give a sort of a background, water in a garden is really important. Doesn't matter how small your garden is, some sort of body of water should be incorporated where possible. It doesn't need to be a spitting lion's head on a wall or whatever.
I'm liking the sound of that.
Yes, or perhaps a little peeing boy in a fountain, you know, all that sort of stuff. But if you're going to use bodies of water in the garden, the smaller the body of water, the less likely that you're going to be able to make it look natural, like as in a billabong or whatever.
Or a pond in the woods.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So I think the more or the less self-conscious you need to be about the fact that it is an artificial body of water, revel in the fact that it is, and that's really important.
Okay, we shall revel away. What we're going to look at in this program then is a small kind of artificial, are we going to call that? A small artificial body of water. We'll make a series of films about Stephen's ponds and small water features, and we will create a playlist and they'll all sit together, including aquatic plants and care and design, etc. Okay, let's have a closer look at this body of water.
What a good idea.
Well, here we are beside... Now, is this the smallest water feature in your garden?
It's the smallest, what I would call proper pond. I have sort of bird baths and other things around, but it's the smallest of the ponds.
And you've got interesting little depressions to catch water, but we'll go through those because they're also interesting and serve a purpose. But let's focus on this. So to give the viewers an idea then, and we'll show the area, it's right next to your house. So there's the dining room doors there. You come out of the house. This is a patio with a pergola.
Yep.
So what was your thinking about this?
All right. The idea was that it would be the main feature as you looked out from the lounge room. Yep. So you needed to have something out of the French doors that you could look out on. Yep. So a body of water seemed to me to be an appropriate thing to do. Yes. In the summer, when the doors are open, you can hear the tinkling of water.
Which you might be able to do now. It's actually, it's very calming, isn't it?
It is.
It's a gentle tinkle. It's not a gush.
Well, it can gush. I mean, I can turn it up. But it is just a little recycling pump in the middle of the pond, and it just has a little water jet that just comes up from under the water, so it pushes water through water to make a little thing, not some sort of elaborate fountainy thing stuck up out of the water. So it's just a little bubbler.
Versailles-esque water feature.
Yes, exactly.
And so, first question then, in terms of the water health, that turning of the water is important to stop it stagnating?
Oh yes, it has a couple of goldfish in it. By having some sort of water circulation thing going on, it aerates the water, it gives the fish something to breathe. It is in a quite shady aspect, which is not the best thing for a pond. A little bit of light is generally a good idea.
Why is that?
Well, if you've got a bit more light, then you can grow things like water lilies and other plants that require a fair bit of light. So I can't have a lot of submersible plants in there. I've got some ribbon weeds and things growing there, but
we'll get to the planting. I want to talk about practicalities. Now, earlier on you were saying that with a small body of water, you kind of need to emphasize that it's artificial because you can't make it look like a natural pond. So what are your thoughts about that?
All right, well, what I did was first I found myself a fiberglass body, and it's about 6 feet or 2 meters wide.
And it's perfectly circular?
And it's a perfectly circular pond. It's got a flat bottom. Because it's black and the sides are dead straight, you can't actually really see the infrastructure under there. All you see is the water. So for God's sake, don't go out and buy a blue one. Just make sure you go for something that's dark and subtle.
So what would you suggest, like a black body or dark green? Would that also work?
Yeah, look, I think black is by far the best colour. A lot of those fiberglass free-form ponds that were being sold for years were done with sort of a sand-blasted brown finish, and they always looked like I don't know, some sort of weird jelly mould, and they never really blended into the garden. And of course they were trying to look natural, and of course they couldn't.
Right. I see. Now, I hadn't thought of that, but actually yours does look It looks very deep, it looks very mysterious, it looks very much like a nymph's pool.
Yeah, well, I have to say it's probably only about, in the old measurements, 18 inches to 2 feet deep.
Right.
So it's not actually very deep.
So that's about 60 centimetres?
Yeah, roundabout. But it's a big enough body of water that I can have fish in. You know, it has depth to it so that you don't really know where the bottom is.
Yeah.
And being perfectly circular, I've just put a stone coping around the top of it and kept the circular line because I wanted to hide the fiberglass.
Yeah, but also not try and pretend that it's natural. So it's artificial, but when you see the setting, it actually looks very beautiful and harmonious.
Yep.
So those were your precepts then. Now, what about the surrounds and the planting? So you wanted it to be a sightline from the house, and you can see the beautiful vegetation around the back, which suggests a tropical environment.
Well, it does, and that was sort of the thought, you know, a little body of water in a tropical garden, in a less than tropical Mount Macedon.
Yeah.
So
Do you have to chip the ice off sometimes?
But when you're planting around water, for me, the important thing is to plant things that seem somehow appropriate.
Yeah.
A cactus wouldn't.
Right, okay. So what are some of your conditions for something being appropriate? What do you look for then in a plant?
If you see water in nature, you tend to find plants with reedy type foliage. So I wanted some rushy reedy type plants
like
around
this?
the water.
And what is this one?
This one is actually an Iris fetidissima, that revels under the fabulous common name of the stinking gladwin. So I've used a fair few strappy leaf things. I've used bamboos around the pond. And of course the other thing you see around water bodies is often things with large leaves, because large leaf plants need a lot of water to oomph them up, and so they often grow by water. So
now that I didn't know either.
Yeah, so there you go.
So you're a mind of information, Stephen, right?
Well,
maybe that's why you're here.
Yes, it could be. So I've used some of the elephant's ears, the alocassias, I've used clivias, I've used irises, I've used sort of ferny type foliages.
Aspidestra?
Aspidestra works well because it's got strappy sort of leaves. Keeping in mind that because this pond is a fiberglass construct, it's not damp around the outside of the pond.
So this is the other thing. So you can't create that kind of bog marsh garden on the periphery because it's fiberglass. So you have to choose plants that aren't bog plants but suggest that they are.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a matter of just evoking a look. And if you can evoke the look, then it's fine. I mean, you could perhaps make some bogs around the edge by enclosing containers in the ground and all that sort of thing. It's a lot of hard work and it could be quite difficult. That is a nice segue, I have to say, Matthew.
Yes.
Because maintenance is one of those things that people always worry about.
Yes, and also mosquitoes and dirt and, well, not dirt, but, you know, stuff. Appearing in it.
There is a little bit of maintenance involved. By having goldfish in the pond, I don't have a mosquito issue because they will eat the mosquito larvae. So from that perspective, I'm not worried about mosquitoes in the garden.
Do you feed the fish or are they self-sustaining?
They tend to be self-sustaining. I don't remember the last time I threw any fish food in there, and they're still alive.
They're still happy.
Yeah, so they're fine as long as you've got the right size body of water, the right number of fish, and you know they can look after themselves surprisingly well.
Okay.
And as far as management's concerned, I have to pull the pump out regularly and clean it. So it tends to get gunked up with bits and pieces.
How regularly is regular?
With this particular pond, I'd probably do it 3 or 4 times a year.
So that's not a huge amount of time.
No, it's not. And probably about once a year, because it is underneath the canopy of larger trees and shrubs around it, I get a fair bit of windfall foliage and things that drop into the pond. I sometimes scoop them off the surface when I've got the time, which only takes a few minutes. But about once a year, I have to actually completely empty the pond, take out the fish, put them in a bucket for a few hours and completely scrub and clean out the pond. But because it's a fiberglass pond, it's fairly easy to clean out once you do that. So look, in the scheme of things, the amount of time I spend on management with the pond is comparatively small for the amount I get back from it.
And much less than a swimming pool.
Much less than a swimming pool.
Now, one other thing I can see, which we'll show the viewers, is that you do have aquatic plants. So what is your strategy around to use aquatic plants or not, given its depth and its shade? And so what are your decision-making processes there?
Well, forget all your colourful water lilies and all those sorts of things.
Now, do all aquatic flowerers need full sun? Is there anything that would flower in shade?
The only plant I can think of is the water hawthorn, which will flower in semi-shade, and I've been thinking about having a crack at some of those. But the problem with plants that float on the surface and flower is that they do in fact take away from the view of the water to an extent. So if you're going to put things in a smallish pond, you've got to think that through very carefully before you actually place them in the water if they're going to cover the surface.
Oh, yeah, I see, because there isn't much volume.
No. So I probably wouldn't bother, even if it was in a full sunspot, putting too many water plants in it because I want to see the water.
Right. And what have you got in there though? You've got some strappy aquatic plant.
Yeah. Well, it's just one of the ribbon weeds, which is one of the oxygenating plants. So it will help put some oxygen in there, and it does seem to be able to cope with quite low light levels. It's just growing in a pot that I can lift out when I clean the pond and then plonk it back in again when the pond has been tidied up.
And that will also provide habitat and fun times for the fish.
Well, it gives them somewhere that they can sneak into. That's the other thing too, because the pond is comparatively shallow and we get things like kookaburras and other birds that will eat fish. I've also got in the water there a couple of terracotta drainage pipes, so the fish can swim through the pipes and it gives them somewhere to hide.
To duck and hide.
Yeah. So
when the siren sounds.
Yeah, well, I have to say I have not yet lost a fish out of this pond, because one of the things that I really do object to is if you put a fish pond in the garden and then
covering it with net or wire.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's ugly.
The aesthetics are lost completely and immediately.
Yes.
So if I had to do
an
that,
actual pond.
No, if I had to do that, then I don't think I would bother with a pond.
All right.
It's comparatively shallow. If somebody trips and falls into it, hopefully they'll come out alive. Because it's a fish pond, I don't in fact have to have it fenced.
Yeah.
Rules and regulations at the moment don't ask you to fence a fish pond, which is probably a good thing, because again, it would lose its whole point if I had to put a fence around it.
It would. Well, you know, what we might just do is do a quick circuit of the pond and just talk briefly to each of the things you planted.
All right, what a good idea. All right, I'm now standing in amongst the jungle around my pond, and we've got a range of different plant forms and shapes to have a look at. The Alocassia or elephant's ear gives a wonderful tropical look. Consider big, bold foliage plants, even around a comparatively small body of water. It gives that wonderful sort of exuberant look. Ferns, of course, are another thing that would look in place, especially if the pond is in the shade. I've got clivias growing around the pond, so the nice strappy leaves of the clivias on both sides of the pond. They give me interesting foliage all year round, and during their flowering period in the late spring, I have a wonderful show of pale lemon yellow flowers on the particular variety I selected. I've also used aspidestra, which is a fabulous plant. Great bold foliage, tough as old nails, copes with dry, which of course all these plants have to cope with a bit of dry around the outside of the pond. And just for a tropical-esque look, I'm standing next to a variegated cordyline, which the trunk has now gone well above me. At some point or another, I will cut it off down low and start it off again, and I'll have multiple trunks. So it's probably getting a wee bit tall now to be part of the scene, but it will come back into the scene in time. Most of the plants I'm using around the pond are hardy to borderline hardy. Clivias and things like the elephant's ears, the Alocassias, are slightly frost tender, so wouldn't be any good in really cold climates, but you can find lots of strappy leaf things and large leaf things that would make an alternative. Perhaps, for instance, take large leaves, you might look at things like fatsias, the Japanese Aralias. They're fantastic with their big bold leaves and give a good tropical look to around a pond. And of course, strappy leaf plants, there's lots of rushes, grasses, reeds, all sorts of plants that would naturally grow around a pond that will come from really cold climates and work well. You might well wonder why there's a log of wood lying in my pond, and if you look down here you can see there's a stick. Now the issue I did have with this pond is the fact that the stone coping around the edge hangs out over the water slightly, and frogs were getting into the pond and they couldn't get out. And what happened was, believe it or not, frogs can drown. So I lost a couple of frogs. So I keep what I call my frog ladder in place. So it's just a piece of wood sticking out of the water up onto the edge, and I haven't had a drowned frog since.
What a beautiful space. Thank you for your Small Pond 101.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed diving into my pond with me.
It has been a beautiful splash about. It's interesting your point about having a small pond like this and not trying to make it look natural, not apologizing for it, but paving it and using that kind of hard landscaping to make it fit.
Yeah, I think it's something that people should consider. You can't create something natural that's that small.
No, it looks wonderful. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this. Do subscribe. We post every week if you want to follow more adventures. We will make more videos about your other water features.
I think so. In fact, all my philosophies, practices and principles will show up on the program in due course.
My good. And then you'll produce a book, and then there'll be, yes, the little blue book of Stephen Ryan. We can all chant your aphorisms.
Oh dear.
Thank you very much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Goodbye all.